Of all of Kenilworth's celebrated architects, perhaps the most influential was George Washington Maher. For decades, he was one of the most widely recognized architects in the area, known for his ability to blend the traditional with the modern.
George Maher was an individual who lived a life distinctively his own. His architectural works crossed the country, yet his focus was local. He not only lived in Kenilworth, he helped to shape it. His artistic vision gifted Kenilworth beautiful structures and spaces to welcome, gather, and live. Yet for all his creative brilliance, familial affinity, and civic engagement, his was a life of struggle against an unseen and persistent foe, a struggle which tragically brought his distinctive life to an early close. Kathy Cummings.
When Joseph Sears first created Kenilworth in 1889, Franklin Burnham was chief architect. Burnham designed the very first homes, as well as the train station and Kenilworth Union Church.
20 years ago, the property was virgin forest. No doubt the plans proposed must have seemed visionary, but the citizens have worked together for its right development and the preservation of its natural beauty. George Maher.
Maher started his career as a teenager, working in the office of Joseph Silsby, side by side with Frank Lloyd Wright, with whom he remained lifelong friends. Maher's earliest known affiliation with the village was in 1891, when he designed Mary Keyes Babcock's residence at 315 Cumnor.
George W. Maher had completed Mrs. Babcock's residence when we asked the young architect to dine and to bring his wife. He replied that he would be glad to do so as soon as he had one. Helen Sears.
In 1893, George married Elizabeth Brooks and brought her to their newly constructed home at 424 Warwick Road, La Châtelet, designed by Maher. The following year, they welcomed their only child, Phillip, into the family. During his lifetime, Maher designed 36 houses in Kenilworth, making the community the largest concentration of George Maher buildings anywhere. Many of these houses were specifically designed for particular families. In addition to houses, Maher designed the Rugby School for Boys at 320 Leicester Road. And in 1909, he designed a major renovation of the original Kenilworth Union Church, adding the Culbertson Gymnasium and Guild Room. That same year, he also designed the boathouse for Kenilworth Beach. When Kenilworth had grown to the point of needing a public school, Maher again provided his talent several times over. He designed the original schoolhouse in 1898 and its subsequent expansions. And again in 1912, he designed a brick schoolhouse that would become the first Joseph Sears School. In 1899, Joseph Sears secured funds from the Chicago, North Shore, and Milwaukee Electric Railroad for improvements to Kenilworth Avenue in exchange for the electric railroad being allowed to operate through Kenilworth. The Kenilworth Board of Trustees approved a plan and design of Maher's to use these funds for the construction of the Kenilworth Fountain and the limestone benches and urns that flank Kenilworth Avenue. Maher influenced the appearance of Kenilworth Avenue again when he was elected as one of the 5 founding Park District Commissioners in 1906. As a commissioner, Maher was able to advance his ideas about presenting an appealing entrance to the village from the train station.
Many citizens did not think it wise to expend money beautifying the entrance. They argued that here was where stores would ultimately be built, where lumber and coal yards should be placed. They argued that it was unheard of to beautify to any great extent around a railroad station, where there was noise, dirt, and cinders. In fact, many of the approaches to other suburban stations are unattractive, but we wanted a hospitable entrance to greet one from the station, a fountain of running water in the center of the open square, permanent stone seats, stone vases filled with flowers in summer, bronze lamps, and the original forest elms, glorious natural sentinels welcoming the guest to the rural homes of the inhabitants. George Maher.
Expanding upon his earlier work with the fountain, benches, and urns, George secured the lots on either side of Kenilworth Avenue between Cumnor Road and Richmond Road as parkland. He did this both by buying the majority of the land himself and selling it to the Park District at cost, and through the donation of the remaining land by Joseph Sears. The lots on the northwest side of Kenilworth Avenue became Memorial Park, and the lots opposite became the site of the Kenilworth Assembly Hall the following year. Elsewhere in the village, Maher provided the design for the bridges across the Skokie Ditch, the pillars at Sheridan Road and 10th Street, and the decorative urns at the intersection of Kenilworth Avenue and Sheridan Road. Perhaps Maher's most significant design in Kenilworth is the Assembly Hall, an excellent example of the Prairie School style of architecture. By 1906, Kenilworth's population had grown to where community gatherings could no longer be held comfortably in Kenilworth Hall. That year, Joseph Sears donated the lots on the southeast side of Kenilworth Avenue between Cumnor and Richmond Roads for the construction of a new assembly hall. Another early resident, James A. Culbertson, donated $10,000 toward the project. The remaining cost was provided by other generous residents. The Assembly Hall, by and for all citizens of Kenilworth, included a large meeting hall with stage, a kitchen, and a library. The building's most iconic feature, however, was the entrance portico built around a full-grown elm tree. The Assembly Hall went through an expansion in 1914, also under Maher's architectural guidance, adding coat rooms on the south side.
The architect should consider himself fortunate to live in a growing community, and where it is possible as a citizen to exert his skill for improvements, making them practical and beautiful. This is a privilege, and he should work unselfishly for the common good. George Maher.
The Assembly Hall underwent a complete restoration effort between 2002 and 2008 to repair deteriorating structural and design elements. As of 2016, the ownership and stewardship of the Assembly Hall was transferred from the Kenilworth Club to the Kenilworth Park District. In 2020, a project was completed by the Park District installing reproductions of Maher's original lighting structure designs. Efforts continue to restore and preserve Maher's creation that has provided a gathering place for Kenilworth for over 110 years. In the early 1920s, Kenilworth voted to annex 3 parcels of land west of the railroad tracks. One of these parcels was the 40 acres of the North Shore Golf Club, which Maher and 48 Kenilworth residents purchased for development purposes. In 1923, George W. Maher and Son proposed an improvement plan for these 2 tracts of land. The plan included the newly formed Kenilworth Community Development on the land of the old golf course, a business district between Wayland and Park Drive, extensive parkland along both sides of the railroad, and an elevated train platform over Kenilworth Avenue. The North Shore Golf Club clubhouse, designed by Maher and built in 1917, remained, with the intention of converting it to a high-class inn. Maher and son Phillip also designed several speculative houses on Raleigh Road and were a part of the development of Kenilworth Beach in the 1920s. Maher's proposed plan, and many of the plans put forth by the village, never materialized. The second youngest of 6 children, George Maher came from a large family and spent most of his life surrounded by and engaged with his family. He lived with his parents in Chicago when they finally moved to the city in 1884, possibly several years after Maher had made the move himself to start his architecture career. It is presumed he continued living with his parents until his marriage and the completion of his own house in Kenilworth in 1893. Maher's familial nature encompassed his extended family as well. His niece and nephew, Violet and Merle Wilde, would frequently stay with the Mahers, to the extent they were almost adopted children. Violet's journal entries tell of Maher helping her decorate a sign for her bake sale, sending her presents while traveling, and taking her to church and the movies. Merle, who shared a birthday with George, recalled celebrating their birthdays at the Mahers with George at one end of the table and Merle at the other, each with their birthday cakes. Maher designed and built a house for his parents at 508 Washington Avenue in Wilmette. In 1912, he designed a house for the Wilde family in Winnetka. Sometime between 1900 and 1905, George purchased the 80-acre fruit farm south of Douglas, Michigan, that would become the family's summer retreat. George designed and built 3 cottages: Hilaire for Elizabeth, George, and Phillip, Landis Lodge for Maher's widowed sister Mary and her 3 children, and the cottage for Alden and Ellen Brooks. The families would spend weekends and sometimes weeks on end at their Michigan sanctuary every year. Maher appears to have developed an interest in produce gardening rather early on. In an 1893 letter from his father, Theophilus wrote of George deserving a prize for his sweet potatoes.
The farm had nearly every kind of fruit and included several excellent apple orchards. My father proceeded to run the farm by hiring a young farmer and shipping fruit to Chicago, but the operation seldom showed any profit. He would come over by boat to South Haven or Sagatuck every week and spend considerable energy in trying to make a profitable enterprise out of the undertaking. It was, however, a blessing to the whole family, who enjoyed the fresh vegetables and fruit. Philip Maher.
The Michigan Fruit Farm was the climax of Maher's interest in agriculture. Maher was reportedly one of the first men on the North Shore to own an automobile. In the 1911 Book of Chicagoans, George Maher's entry includes recreations, motoring and fruit farming in Michigan on scientific principles. He owned both a Hudson Coupe and a Packard. He drove various family members back and forth between the Michigan farm, Chicago, and Kenilworth.
The difficult thing is to keep myself doing something that is of interest and free from thinking too much, which is our chief ailment. As I view it, this nervous breakdown was on its way some time, and if I had not lived the quiet, beautiful life that you always advocated, I would undoubtedly broke down earlier.
For all his creative genius and love for family, George Maher privately struggled with unseen demons. He faced a lifetime of mental health issues at a time when the medical profession remained largely ignorant of how to treat mental illness and carried a greater social stigma than today. Even after his death, Phillip attributed his father's depression to a brain tumor. The first known sign appeared sometime in late 1892 or early 1893, when Maher was struck with a, quote, severe nervous disorder. The details of this early affliction are unknown, but he traveled to Europe for several months in 1893 in an attempt to regain his health.
All of this seems strange, and here I am away from the dearest girl on earth, practically in seclusion just because one's nerves are on strike, but which in a sense it seems indicates yet there is no ailment I am aware of so exasperating, since it strikes at the very roots of happiness and love and usefulness also.
In a letter from his mother dated July 20, 1893, Sarah asked George, "Do you sleep better than you did before we left?" Though evidence on Maher's struggle does not appear again until the 1920s, he most likely fought depression and insomnia in the years in between. In early 1924, Maher was beset with a serious bout of weakness, depression, and anxiety. Beginning in May 1924, he went through a succession of stays at health resorts and restoration hospitals in Tryon, North Carolina, Winnetka, Illinois, and Oconomowoc, Wisconsin.
The baths are hot and the water charged with electricity, so one can gauge if they are getting any stronger by feeling the charge of electric current through their bodies. My night medicine time includes 2 ounces of whiskey, as I told you when here. This seems strange, but I have to obey the doctor's orders, and I do notice that it helps me to obtain sleep. I am now able to get about from 4 to 5 hours of sleep, which of course helps very much. I am hoping my blamed head will stop aching, but this must be a part of the nervous disorder. At least I must bear it. And so far, I am yet alive. January 3rd, 1925.
George was described as strict and temperamental towards those he employed. Whether this was a result of his condition or a symptom, it is impossible to say. On August 9, George admitted himself to the Milwaukee Sanitarium in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. George was diagnosed with involutional melancholia.
If I could get home and perhaps attend to new situations, it might be to my advantage. However, I know nothing really about this nervous disorder except that I am a victim. You are my real doctor, and will depend absolutely upon your advice. Oh, if I could only come home. February 12th, 1925.
He remained in the Milwaukee Sanitarium until December 14, 1925. His discharge report read only, "Much improved."
My darling wife, I just received your last letter enclosing again your sweet sentiments to me, and may I send back to you, my darling wife, this same sentiment. Your echoes, my Valentine, my wife. I pray that thou wilt be not for a day but for eternity. I know, dear Bessie, that you care for me. I feel it in every fiber of my weak body. I know that I care for you in every heartbeat. I have always loved you more than can be expressed. Pardon me, dearest, for being so sentimental. I feel our being parted is so cruel and so hard to bear for both of us, when we could make each other so happy. But let us not be discouraged and impatient and thus defeat our every hope. We know that together we shall always be. No heaven would be a place of happiness if we were parted. I hope now, my dearest, that you will enjoy every opportunity, every chance to see the fine in life and the beautiful. Life is many-sided, so when we can enjoy the spiritual and be able to appreciate all our blessings, we should take full opportunity, should we not? Well, I just had to write this letter. I know you will understand. Yes, dearest, I know your spirit. It is true and it is beautiful. With all my love and kiss, ever yours, George.
However much improved George was, at the time he left Wauwatosa, he was still suffering. Following his discharge from the Milwaukee Sanitarium, George Maher returned to Kenilworth in time to celebrate his 60th birthday with friends and family. It is unknown if he took up any new projects. By then, Phillip had taken over operation of the George Maher and Son firm. During the summer of 1926, the Mahers and extended family made their way to the Michigan farm. On Sunday, September 12, 1926, George Maher sat in his car in the garage of his bungalow and shot himself.
Early Sunday morning, the family was unable to locate him and roused residents in all the buildings in Hilaire. It was Violet Wilde and her brother Merle who found him dead in his car in the garage of the bungalow. Kit Lane.
His body was escorted back to Chicago by his sister Mary Hooker. He was laid to rest in Chicago's Rose Hill Cemetery next to his parents and sister.
It isn't easy to know George Maher, but we can piece together one miniature biography to the next and begin to see a person beyond the architect photographed in his LaSalle Street studio surrounded by books, presentation drawings, and his own poppy art glass. I enjoyed many years with George W. Maher. He arrived in my life through his houses in Wausau, Wisconsin. I found the young Maher working with Cecil Corwin, Frank Lloyd Wright, and others. Next came his years designing from his own architectural office, with amazing results, including the elaborate Patton House in Evanston, Illinois, and the Leach House in South Orange, New Jersey. These two houses are gone now, visible only in photos. I learned about his family life from surviving family members. One bit of my education came from his nephew, Merle Wilde, who told me that Maher loved to load up his car with family members, drive to a course, then golf alone while his passengers waited. Then I learned of the end of his years and was sad about them. Thanks to all the Maher material, him, his family, his clients, I am still appreciating George Maher. Donald Alcott.